you started GallantFew and what GallantFew's mission is.
Well, I spent 10 years on active duty as an Army officer. ROTC, Ranger, was an infantry platoon leader, company commander, and then did my last 3 years was as a staff officer in the 1st Ranger Battalion. And in 1992, October 29th, we had a helicopter crash that killed 12 guys. 2 Ranger Battalion commanders, a Ranger Company 1st Sergeant, 2 Ranger RTOs, and 6 Air Force combat controllers. And I knew every man that was on that bird, and that event changed my priorities, it changed my life. And within the next 8 months, I'd made the decision to leave the military. Kind of a snap decision. Some things had gone sour for me in the short time before that. And so I said, screw it, I'm out. And I walked into my boss's office, who at that time was Major Joe Votel, who's still on active duty today, very well known in the Ranger community. And I said, Joe, I'm done. I'm leaving the Army. And within 2 weeks, I'm in Wichita, Kansas. At that time, Rangers had high and tights. I still had high and tight haircut. And so I stood out like a sore thumb. And I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, because I had 2 young daughters and my wife didn't have a college education, and I'm under the gun to figure it out real quick. And so as I started trying to find my way, my military experience for some reason was not translating over. I was having more doors shut in front of me than opened up. And I even had one place tell me that, you Army officers know how to follow orders and do what you're told, but here at this company, we need people that have initiative, think outside the box, and don't need constant supervision. So at that time, there was a mentality that people in the military were more like robots, I guess. And I think there are still some perceptions like that now, but the environment has changed significantly post 9/11, where the civilian community at least says that they're more supportive of veterans than they might have been before. It was kind of ignorant because it was peacetime, and you didn't recognize the sacrifice that some made. So I went the next about 7 years not really being connected to the veteran community. I had kind of dabbled and checked in on some of, as things started, like ArmyRanger.com started a Ranger discussion group. And so I'm kind of starting to put my feelers in those, but I'm really hesitant because I was there and I quit and I left because things didn't work out the way that I thought they were going to. So I didn't know if I really was going to be accepted as part of that community. And then 9/11 happened. And my old boss, Joe Votel, had jumped into Afghanistan with Steve Bannock, who was 3rd Ranger Battalion Commander, who was another good friend of mine. But I hadn't talked to any of them since 1993. And so I shot Joe an email and just said, hey, I'm jealous, I'm proud. I wish I could have been there. Please pass along how grateful we all are for what you've done. And he shot me an email back from Afghanistan and invited me. I was still in the Army Reserve system, so I had access to the AKO system at that time. And he ended up inviting me to Ranger Rendezvous in his change of command in 2003. And when I came back, I was hesitant about coming back because I was the guy that left. And now they'd all gone to war and they'd done all these historic combat assaults, and they're like the Rangers that went in World War II. And here I'm a guy that's kind of a strap hanger, and how would they feel about me coming back? And when I got there, I was welcomed with open arms. I was amazed and astounded by the guys that I'd served with that came up and said, hey, how have you been? Tell us, how's life on the outside? And as I started asking them questions, I started learning about the inabilities of the system to deal with the stresses and the injuries and the divorces and the alcohol and all of the things that they were going through, because the pace of combat deployments, they're carrying the weight for the military. Nobody knew it outside of that community, but they're carrying it. And so when I left there, I was motivated and energized to organize the Ranger community to help any of those Rangers as they left the military. So I set up the first big LinkedIn networking group for Rangers that now is called U.S. Army Rangers, which we've gotten away from a little bit. We've got to get back and really engage in that group more, because there's about 7,000 Rangers that are in that group now. But back in 2003 to 2008, over that 5 years, that group grew to be about 1,000 Rangers. And because it was smaller than every Ranger that joined, I personally checked out. If they had a tab, if they said they were a Vietnam LRP, if they said they served in a battalion, I would verify that. And then I'd bring them into the group. Here's the rules. This is a professional group. It's not Facebook. And I would, as I brought them in, I would say, who are you, where are you going, what are you doing? And they would say, left the Army a year ago, I'm in Colorado going to school, I'm trying to find a job. Or I just got divorced and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. Whatever it was they told me, then I would dig into that network and I would find a ranger that was close and I would connect them. And I would get them in contact with each other, right, with the expectation that you don't let your ranger buddy down. And in 2009, as the economy went into this nosedive and businesses were having trouble, I got laid off from my job. And so I'd spent so much time working this ranger network that with the encouragement of some other guys that I knew, they said, we need to set up a nonprofit. And so GallantFew in 2010 became a 501c3, initially just to help rangers. But backing up to when I left the military, as I'm going through all of my frustration, a buddy of mine who had served as an infantry officer but never jumped out of a plane, never went to ranger school or anything like that, he helped me, he hired me, pulled me into his company, and he mentored me through that process. And he was one of the guys that encouraged me to start the nonprofit. So right away he says, so what you're doing works great for rangers, which means it'll probably work good for other people because rangers lead the way. And he said, what are you doing for veterans like me? Never did any special operations. I did my time, did my service, I got out. So we said, okay, we'll help any veteran, any branch of the service to the best extent of our capacity. And initially that wasn't very many, a couple of dozen the first year. And we've grown ever since to where I can't put a number on exactly, but it's more than 500 last year. And one of the things that we learned then initially, we were only going to help veterans that had honorable discharges because, hey, if you don't have an honorable discharge, screw you, right? Then I started running into veterans that had really honorable, notable service, and then all of a sudden in their last deployment, they became dumb as a box of rocks and started misinformation, getting drunk, doing stupid things, and now they're labeled a dirtbag and they're thrown out. And post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury played a huge role in that. And the system was not, those injuries, if somebody had received a gunshot wound, they wouldn't have been called a dirtbag for getting in the way of the bullet. But now you have somebody that has post-traumatic stress and it's causing them to do things that aren't normal for them. And the chain of command just figures, well, they just became a bad person, now we're going to crush them and send them out. So that's what was happening. They were crushing people. Sometimes they would use marijuana to try to self-medicate because they didn't want to walk into an Army doc and say, something's going on in my head. And then they'd pop on a urinalysis and then they'd get crushed. And so they're losing education benefits and the VA's not, they lose I just can't believe that the system walks away from them. The people that need the help the most are the ones that get the least. So we scrubbed that out and we said, you know what, we'll change that to any veteran, any branch of the service, we'll talk to you and then we'll determine if we can help you. And if somebody is a child molester and they got thrown out of the military for that, we're not going to help you. I'm sorry, there's not an excuse for that. But if they had a urinalysis that came hot or something else happened, then we'll figure that out, right? And we'll find resources to help get you connected. And I was really glad a few years ago when the VA came out and reiterated that, hey, if you have post-traumatic stress and you have another than honorable discharge, we will still provide mental help for you, right? They need to go beyond that, but that's a start. So that's how that all started. And we have a